You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. The title of today's show is, come on Charles, tell us how you really feel. That from Slarty Bardfast on Twitter. The runner-up for the title this week was The Primal Scream of a Tifosi from Jordan W. But I simply wanted to call the show Mattia Bonotto and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Hello. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. Welcome to the French Grand Prix race review. And aside from it being a race that offered some interest, but actually little in the way of strategy and action, in the context of it being a Paul Ricard Grand Prix, it was okay, but it wasn't the fight that we all really wanted to see. It wasn't the fight that we deserved. But we do have a lot to discuss. Clearly, Red Bull and Verstappen are in the ascendancy now, but even they seem at a little bit of a loss at how much the seas are parting for them. And I will warn you, trigger warning, this is going to be a bit of a rough show for the Tifosi, because the joke we've had, all of us on the tip of our tongue before every race is, how will Ferrari throw this one away? But I think it's gone a little bit beyond a joke now. So we'll discuss, is this the worst ever team race performance of a title contending team? We'll count all the ways in which Ferrari could have won. Did Leclerc have the pace? Was Sainz ever a threat? And is the title done? We'll also have a look at that great battle between Perez and Russell and ask, is Hamilton starting to grow into 2022? And then Russell with another scrappy and clearly fast and racy performance. I'm going to posit that Russell is a great future talent, but perhaps isn't quite there yet. We are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our better halves. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined in the shed by Matt Trumpets. Hey, Matt.
Hey there. Currently, I am sweating more than a Ferrari strategist about to meet with Carlos Sainz.
Oh, that's rough. Kyle Power.
I think I'm the only person who likes Paul Ricard.
Oh, good. I can't wait to find out why you're wrong about that. And Antonia Rankin.
Hi, yeah, I'm eagerly awaiting the day that Ferrari actually want to win a world championship.
It definitely feels like the desire isn't there. Have Ferrari bet against themselves? But look, let's have a look at this race and where it was won and lost. So normally, Matt, this is the part of the show where I would turn to you and sort of talk about the strategy. But the strategy element of this race, it never kicked off. It never got going. A lot of talk about, two stops, but it was definitely on that one stop end where Pirelli had settled maybe 2017, 2018 kind of era. Not quite like what we've had this season, where we've been on the cusp of 2-3. And then just, with the way the race panned out, there was just very little strategy to get our teeth into.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you talk about where the race was won and lost, it was turn 11, lap 16, when our friend Charles Leclerc found the wall instead of the exit of the turn.
Oh, do you know what? I was trying to ease our way into that because there's Ferrari fans listening to the show, and I was like, I wasn't going to hit them with it straight away.
To be fair, because what it did was it not only cashiered the alternate strategy of people like Carlos Sainz, but also the early stop strategy of people like Kevin Magnussen. So every piece of strategy we could have evaluated disappeared when that safety car came out.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, why didn't it kick off?
Well, as we've seen quite often, it's a really unfortunately timed safety car, like very, very unfortunate. It happened at just the wrong time, and especially the wrong time for the two Haases. So they'd gone for an extremely aggressive strategy, and I was looking forward to them coming through the mid-pack. But unfortunately, Charlie Leclerc sort of ploughed it into the wall, spectacularly binned it. But if it wasn't for that, we would have had a fantastic. It was shaping up to be a brilliant strategical race. So much so that we weren't really paying much attention to the midfield, but there was also some good little battles brewing there. So once again, we were deceived. Well, we were kind of deprived of a strategy thing by the safety car.
Well, I want to forgive that if it's okay with you guys, and I want to sort of linger a little bit on the battle that we could have had. So Leclerc versus Verstappen was shaping up to be a really interesting battle. It looked like the Ferrari was strong, but you really saw Max Verstappen in kind of hunter mode, and it looked like he was doing that thing that Lewis Hamilton was doing so effectively in 2020, 2021 against Bottas, and where he would run down the opponent in front of him, the tyres, wait for that tyre wear to kick in, and then strike. And that's what we were thinking it was going to shape up as. But actually, I do wonder whether Leclerc had a little bit more control in that situation than it first seemed. Kyle?
Yeah, it did. I actually think Leclerc was playing a very, very dangerous, well, not dangerous, a very brave game, because midway through the stint, like Verstappen was right on him, and he had several opportunities, well, not quite opportunities, but very close, where Leclerc actually had to go defensive, and it got quite tight. But then a few laps after that, we saw Leclerc drop his relative lap time, like not the ultimate lap time, because they're already starting to get into a tyre degradation phase by then, but he suddenly started pulling out 3 to 4 tenths a lap on Verstappen. So I actually think that he was intentionally not going quite as quick as he could have done, because he was trying to look after his tyres, and also he was trying to keep Verstappen in his dirty air to maybe ruin his tyres as well. So I think he was playing a dangerous, brave, and very clever game there, because I think he had quite a bit left in hand. Hence, he didn't instantly react when Red Bull triggered the very aggressive one-stop strategy and pitted Verstappen early. They still left Leclerc out a couple of laps.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think Verstappen pitted on, lap 17, because his tyres were knackered from being in Leclerc's dirty air for so long. I mean, Leclerc did manage to hold him there for a very long time. And I actually do think the battle stabilised a little bit. I don't think at that point in the race it was looking like Verstappen was going to take Leclerc. So in terms of arguing about strategy, I do think maybe Red Bull were expecting to get in front, didn't quite manage it as soon as they thought they would. So might have had to tweak their strategy slightly. However, I do think in the grand scheme of things, Verstappen's tyres were a lot more degraded than Leclerc's were at that stage in the race.
Well, what I love about this is that I think it was lap 6. Leclerc had just a minor twitch on acceleration, and Verstappen almost got him. He was in DRS. He was poking at the edges. He was looking up the insides, but Leclerc just managed to hold him off. And I think by the time that they pitted, I would agree. I think Verstappen's tires had gone off. But what I really want to make the point of is, one, Ferrari actually told Leclerc his tire degradation looked good around lap 15. That's when I heard it. It might have been earlier, but Ferrari were happy with the way the tires were working on the car at that pace. I love that. And I love the fact that Ferrari had clearly made the decision to not respond, to go long. So we were going to have the tire offset at the end with Leclerc trying to overtake Verstappen on this track. And it would have been glorious had it happened.
Yeah, I agree. Because and we also heard the engineers on the radio going for plan A. We're now on to plan B. So I actually think the Ferrari plan A, particularly with their new sets of mediums they had available, was going to be a 2-stop. And I think plan B was the 1-stop. And the first stint was actually starting to evolve better than they thought it was. And also they had the brilliant data of Carlos Sainz starting on the hard tyres. And they told Leclerc like a golden nugget of information there of the hard tyres 0.2 seconds slower than we expected, and they are overheating. So they're getting this data from Sainz. So they suddenly realized that actually our tyres are okay. Let's push this and extend this further and now move this onto plan B, onto a 1-stop. And when they told Leclerc, he was like, yeah, whatever. He sounded pretty calm about it and sort of a kind of like a nonchalant agree.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I actually think that the tyres were one of the biggest curveballs in this race in terms of what changed how the teams were performing. Mainly, I think actually the weather was a big component. They really did big up the teams at the start of the race. It was a lot hotter than they expected. Yeah. Track temperature was through the roof. And so the way that the tyres performed was different than the teams thought it would be.
Explain how.
Now, well, because tyres degrade faster when it's hotter. So with the track temperature being so high, the tyres will be more prone to blistering, to overheating. And that's when we can see snaps of oversteer and various issues with grip. And I do think that that's what changed the strategies of the pit stops from 1-stops to 2-stops to then back again. And then there was the safety car. So I think, to be honest, I don't think it was just Ferrari that were floundering a bit. I just think it was Ferrari whose mistakes really got highlighted.
Okay, so what I want to try and establish here is during that plan B, let's go to plan B radio message. And by the way, I don't think they've ever completed a race on plan A. I'm starting to suspect there is no plan A. But when they said go plan B, that's when Leclerc went from defending in the DRS zone to actually stretching out and getting a 2-second lead built up. So it's almost like he had gotten permission to go and use the tyres up a little bit, use up a little bit of pace, which ultimately might not have paid off. And then Red Bull responded by going, oh, maybe we're not as close as we thought on pace. And I think this kind of goes back to what I was saying a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure Max Verstappen is very capable of saving tyres if he has to. It's just not his go-to tactic that he wants. And I think in this race, and in a few races gone by, we've seen him go out hard, wanting to use up the tyres, wanting to like get ahead, control the race. I think that's kind of what we saw here.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a duality really between whether the team does the exact thing in terms of pit strategy as their rivals or the complete opposite. So in terms of this case, like it was said, there was going to be the offset between the tyre strategies, which I think would have been really interesting. But today it was a case of do whatever Red Bull don't do, or do whatever Ferrari don't do.
Yeah, and this also sort of gets back to the fundamental battle between the two different concepts of these cars, where Ferrari likes to be fast, where Red Bull likes to be fast. But the thing that I wanted to bring up, I don't know if anybody knew, but like I was watching the track temperatures.
Nerd.
And it went from 53 at the start to 58 the last time I saw it. So the temperature of the track was going up, and that was going to really complicate. And that might have been part of Ferrari's problem later on in the race when they were dealing with Carlos Sainz.
Maria, hello, live chat. Maria in our Patreon live chat has said it was plan B for Binnett. That is naughty, Maria. But yeah, I think we can't go really too far without acknowledging that we didn't get this battle unfolding that we hoped we were going to, because I really do think that at that point where Red Bull had to pit and felt they had to pit and go for that strategy, they were on the back foot. Ferrari were controlling it. I think Ferrari would have ended up at a one stop, and then they would have ended up with a much fresher set of tyres, and then Red Bull would have that dilemma whether to stick it out or whether to try and put some fresh boots on and pull a Carlos Sainz there. But of course, we didn't get that battle because Charles Leclerc binned it into the wall and robbed us of it. So I guess the question is, was that his fault? I am going to defend Leclerc because I think that once you have seen that your opponent is pitting because of tyres, specifically because of tyres, and it is hot, and you know that the characteristics of a hot track is going to be more challenging on tyres, you make that decision to go long on your opening set of tyres on heavy fuel, you're increasing the risk of a crash or an incident, Kyle. So whilst, yes, it was his ultimately a driving error, Ferrari have put him in that position where a driving error is more likely. And it did look like a fairly nothingy, innocuous little twitch.
Yeah, I kind of partly agree. I don't think he was kind of put into that situation. I think he was fairly, about as comfortable as he had been all race. Now, there's a couple of key things to note here before we analyse the crash too much, and that was Leclerc had said that the car had been on edge all weekend. He hadn't really been happy with the balance, and this is also playing into his strengths of why he was so good ironically in corners, like the corner where he binned it, Le Bousson, I can't remember what it was quite called, that corner, but turn 11.
I don't learn the corner names.
So turn 11, because he's getting that rotation, and the Ferrari has seemed a bit like this. The Red Bull seems a bit more understeer and front limited, so it's a bit more understeering and will be a bit easier to drive and not so snappy, whereas the Ferrari has amazing rotation and quite snappy on the rear. And I think what actually initially when I first saw the crash, I thought he's had a strange throttle bubble again. His throttle stuck open, particularly after his message. He's a little bit wide, but he's on the limit. And this car looks snappy. Sainz was having several little snaps when we saw him coming through the field, and little rear end snaps. And so Leclerc had mentioned this going into the corner. Ant Davison did a really good little comparison. But the one thing I did notice that I think Leclerc, the punishment did not fit the crime. Yes, I think it was a driving error, but the car is so on the edge that he was probably about 1 kilometre faster than he was, 1 kilometre an hour faster than he was the lap before and about 50 millimeters wider, slightly on the dirty stuff. And this isn't like the car hasn't gone when he's immediately got off the throttle. The car is complete, and it's not a traction event as we saw with Lewis Hamilton in turn one, where you can react and collect it all up. This is the car's at absolute full load there, and the tires are absolutely screaming at their maximum temperature, and it's just got a little bit wide, and they're the fine margins. It snaps. There was no chance to save it, and it's gone. So ultimately, yes, it was a driving error, but it was such a tiny mistake. But it just goes to show the fine margins, and a fast car is not necessarily an easy car to drive. And we've seen this with the Ferrari and particularly the Mercedes as well. It seems like an incredibly narrow window it needs to be driven in, and he slightly went out of that window.
Yeah, and to me, the unanswered question for me is the wind here. Did the wind play any small part? Because if he's on that much of a limit, then anything can take you from being at 100% to 101% of traction, and off you go. But this also, I think, gets to Leclerc as a driver, too. He doesn't know the difference between 100% and 99.9%. And I don't know, maybe now is not the time to bring this topic up, but it's not quite a championship driver to put it that on the limit, except where you absolutely have to. He's still more like a win it or bin it kind of driver a bit, I think.
Antonia.
Well, aside from the win it or bin it, which I think Schumacher is to be mentioned here, because to win world championships, you do have to have that mentality. I think one of the main...
Go on.
I actually do think, though, one of the main components at Paul Ricard, we do have to remember this track is the test track. We've got slow, medium and high speed corners. We've got a little bit of everything, which means that the actual balance of the car is so important at a track like this. I mean, not even necessarily at turn 10 where Leclerc went off, but on turns like turn 8 where you're going really fast, heavy braking before turning. The car cannot be twitchy. And I actually do think that the balance and the setup overall of the car really played to Red Bull's strengths today, and is a key component in why Leclerc went off, because I just don't think that Ferrari had quite mastered the balance of the car.
But okay, I think we can't go too far away from Matt's comments, because everybody on the panel gave a different look when Matt was basically, you're saying that Leclerc's attitude perhaps might not be correct for this championship battle. And it was one of the things that we talked about pre-season, because he's so hard on himself, because he seems so emotionally on the edge, as well as maybe being on the edge with a driver style. But I don't agree that you need to be win or bin to collect a championship. I think recently, if you look at the titles, we've seen drivers who are able to play the odds, maybe pair off a little bit risk and reward, but then obviously my argument is instantly beaten by Verstappen, isn't it? Because Verstappen 2021 was the definition of win or bin. So I don't know, a little harsh, I think, from Matt there, Kyle.
Yeah, it could be harsh, but also, as Leclerc said himself, yes, he beats himself up, and I think that's a great sort of plus point for him that he owns his mistakes. But of all great drivers fighting for a championship, the ability to be on the limit and keep it there for lap after lap after lap. And he has that, but every now and then he slightly goes outside the box when you're filling in your passport form and the little boxes and you don't want to go outside. Every now and then he strays outside the box and other drivers don't. And they manage to get it completely filled in. Schumacher's amazing at it. Hamilton's really good at it. Verstappen is amazing at it. You rarely see him make mistakes, but unfortunately this is a bit of a common theme with Charles, and he knows it, and it's just really unfortunate. But also it is exaggerated by the Ferrari being a snappy, difficult car to drive.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially if we look at last season. I mean, Verstappen had to have that mentality going up against 7-time world champion. You have to be able to put it all on the line. And I think the thing with drivers like Charles, and to be honest, I think George has elements of that as well. Obviously, Michael Schumacher, I think, is the prime example of a driver like that, especially if we look at his early career. You know, he was very, very brutal, very win at all costs, you know, not aggressive in terms of his actual driving against other drivers, but his mentality was very aggressive. And I think that's what got him his 7 world championships. However, with drivers like Charles, he's going up against the likes of Hamilton, I guess, the likes of Verstappen, and his mentality has to separate him in a way, because Hamilton's mastered the trade of winning world championships, and Verstappen came in with a great car last year and did a phenomenal job. I mean, aside from everyone's opinions on what went down, but with Charles' mentality, it's great because beating himself up means that he's keeping himself in check. However, his kind of defeatist attitude does get a little bit old.
Well, it's old. I suppose it's worrying, and is it ultimately productive? But I would want to defend Charles a little bit, because he is at a team that is putting him under pressure, that is continually putting him in a position where he's having to make up for mistakes in a race. And over the course of this championship now, he's nowhere near where he should be, and he must be feeling more pressure trying to kind of make that up. That could well contribute to being on the edge, because he knows he's got to take advantage before the next Ferrari-ish thing comes along. And so I don't know, Matt, I think as well, like, the team has got, if they've put him in a position where he needs to be on the edge as well to deliver, he's coming into the race weekend with a completely different attitude. If you looked at Verstappen pre-race in the garage, whenever there were shots of him, he couldn't be more relaxed, because he knows he's got a car under him. He knows he's got a team behind him, and he's just all he's got to do. But all he's got to do is deliver and keep it chill, and he knows he's going to get a result.
Yeah, but to me, and actually, I'm glad you bring up Verstappen, because they asked him, and he literally said, "Oh, I had some chances early on in the race." He says, "But you can't send your car off the track."
That's a good point.
Yeah. Making that chance happen. And this was at this race. And so you wait. Sometimes you wait all the way to the end of the race to get that chance. And that consistency, that maturity of thought is what is the only missing piece of the Leclerc puzzle. And it's not missing by much, but I'm not convinced it's all the way there yet.
But I think that approach from Verstappen that's much more of a champion's approach than his approach last year, because he was the plucky, up and comer trying to shake things up last season and challenging Hamilton. But what Hamilton's done to bring home championships, and you can argue about how difficult those various championships were, but the thing he's done to bring home those championships is worrying about the last lap. So people keep throwing the statistic about 2021 that Verstappen led a billion more laps than Lewis Hamilton. Only the last lap really matters, and it looks like Verstappen understands that, certainly in a way that Hamilton understood that as well. So, I mean, quickly, is there any way back? Is the title over for Charles Leclerc? Antonia, is it finished?
It's difficult to say. I think, obviously, at the start of the season, Charles really looked like he was running away with it, and everyone put their hands up and went, Charles has got it, he's going to win. But we've seen how quickly the coin flips, and we've seen how quickly the tables can turn within the points system. And I think with Ferrari, they have very consistently made poor strategic calls. They have very consistently, I think, let down the talent of their drivers on occasions within this season and previous seasons. And I do think until those systematic inadequacies are sorted out, then no, the championship battle is completely Verstappen's.
Systematic and institutional, perhaps. Let's have a little look at Sainz's adventures, and I think that might highlight a few more things. So, Sainz coming from the back, obviously because of yet another Ferrari pitfall, which is reliability. Carlos Sainz, arguably the fastest driver-car combination this weekend, had to fight his way from the back. And even then, I don't think it was inconceivable that he could have come in and had some kind of result. But the catalogue of errors from Ferrari was absolutely bewildering. So I'll quickly list the fails, because it makes hard listening, but let's get this out of the way. They had one driver start at the back because of engine penalties. I think their number one driver ends up going off. I think partly that was down to old tyres, partly because of the pressure he's under. I don't think Ferrari are blameless. And also Leclerc is a Ferrari driver, so that counts as a Ferrari fault. They had a slow stop with Carlos Sainz for his first stop. They released him completely into the path of another car. There was that awful indecision about whether to go off and have another set of tyres. Carlos Sainz really seemed to bully them into even considering going into that second stop. They tell their driver to pit whilst he's in the middle of an overtaking manoeuvre, much to the bewilderment of Sainz on the team radio. Then another 9-second stop, and they end up pitting away from a podium. So all of this, I mean, it's a horrible list. I don't think I've even captured all of it. It's a horrible list, Kyle. All of this with the best two cars this weekend. It was a horror show, and this is why I'm making the case. I think that's the worst performance of a title contending team in any race ever.
I think you are not too far wrong, to be honest. I mean, we have seen some spectacular ball drops in the past. So McLaren used to be quite good at it back in the day. But yeah, this is bad. They've ended up with not egg on their face. They've ended up wearing an omelette, haven't they, this weekend? I mean, it's not been good. On the first ones with the engine, the reliability phase, I've seen some people on Twitter making sort of points that we need to forgive them for that, and they've actually been performing well. But no, that's on them. They're one of the only teams apart from Mercedes who make their engines and their chassis as well.
Absolutely,
it's conclusive like that. It's completely and utterly on them. And the strategy side, we have seen this so many times. We had it back in the Sebastian Vettel days of the driver having to correct the strategists and call it from inside the car. And it's terrible. Like, they have enough on their plate. They're trying to drive the car and race. They don't need to think about the strategy as well.
Someone tweeted that the only way they can get out of this is to convince Vettel to retire and come in as their strategist, because he was doing it from the car anyway. I think you and I, with an engineering background, Carl, we get frustrated with people talking about these engine failures as if it's, you know, an act of God or something like, oh, they were. It's not. No, that it's all about how they commit their resources and how they function as basically an engineering firm.
And testing, and it's almost like your due diligence that you need to do, but in a mechanical sort of sense, when they sort of test these engines and run them to destruction on the test bed and try to, you know, some sort of scenarios you can't really foresee and it's difficult to sort of mitigate against, but they've had quite a lot of time in the season now, and you are allowed to bring reliability upgrades to your engine. So yeah, it's unfortunate. They may be pushing it a bit hard and a bit outside the limit to try to counteract some of this Red Bull amazing slippery car straight line speed that they have. But yeah, you have to own it. It's on them, and it's really, really unfortunate, because I think without the engine failures, we wouldn't have seen this complete train wreck of a performance this weekend, really.
So I'm going to disagree slightly. I think that given the rules and given the fact that, as Kyle correctly points out, you're allowed to make reliability upgrades, I think Ferrari correctly chose performance, expecting that they could make reliability upgrades, but they cannot make performance upgrades. And I think of all the decisions they made, that's the kind of decision you make if you're trying to win a championship rather than trying to not lose a championship. So it might not work. It might not be working out for them in the way they hoped, but I respect it because they absolutely went for it from a power unit point of view.
Yeah, but I think in fairness to Ferrari, they are not the only team who are absolutely blasting through their power units this season. A lot of other teams have taken penalties. A lot of other drivers have had to have new power units fitted above and beyond what they're allowed to have.
The Ferrari teams, though, Antonia, isn't it?
I'm trying to be kind. I'm very aware that Haas are just as criminally responsible. But I think the issue is with Ferrari, they can have one good element in isolation, but that's not how you win a championship. And it goes back to the kind of idea of this institutional problem that Ferrari seems to be having, where the parts of the machine just aren't quite lining up. I mean, they've had various different strategic directors. The current strategic director came in 2021. And if you cast your mind back to the 2019 season, Charles Leclerc was also criminally wronged by strategy in that season as well. And it's not just one person making poor choices. I do think for Ferrari, it's the entire team as a unit not quite functioning as smoothly as other teams are.
I completely agree with that. And I've said on this podcast previously that they have a somewhat sort of a guillotine style of management where heads will roll when things go wrong, and they get rid of people, and they don't have so much stability. And as Antonio points out, they have a relatively new sort of strategy director in there, and the team doesn't have time to gel. They're instantly under pressure. and then mistakes happen. But there must be something wrong with their core processes, because think back to the glory days when there was Schumacher and Brawn. Yeah, single point of failure, but I think it was Brawn crunching the numbers and doing a lot of the strategy, and they were the strategy geniuses. They were class of the pit lane. They snatched so many races from the McLarens that they really shouldn't have won through pure strategy, and they don't seem to do that anymore. And with Sainz, even Sainz calling on, are we going to make this second stop? They ended up doing the cardinal sin of going in no man's land. They either needed to commit really early to pit and put a second sort of set of tires on and go for it, or don't do it at all. And they went somewhere in the middle, and it just defied logic. I was shouting at the TV when I saw him coming out. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it was the Paddy Ashdown strategy, wasn't it? It just didn't work at all. Matt?
All right, so I hate to be that guy.
No, you don't. Don't lie.
That actually guy.
No.
But I have gone back and looked at that pit call to bring Sainz in, and I might be changing my opinion about Ferrari slightly, having made an actually really clever choice there.
Okay. It was hang on. It was a clever choice to give up what seemed like a pretty comfortable third place to pit with absolutely no chance of making those places back up.
Yeah, actually, I think it was.
Okay, but you have to say why, otherwise you just sound mad.
Well, I figured I would get around to that eventually. So here's the first thing. Sainz was on the medium tire, and he was on the medium tire from lap 18. It was 35 laps to get to the end. He was in just barely third place. He just passed Perez when they boxed him. Now, we know at the time he was still faster, or the same pace as Perez, but we don't know how long it was going to last. And what Ferrari were looking at was a gap back to Alonso, which was about 23 seconds. They pitted him. He came out 9 seconds back, caught Alonso, finished P5, but he finished P5 with the fast lap point. Now, tell me the difference in points between P5 and P4.
Don't maths me. You tell me.
It's 1 point.
Okay.
So he finished with P4 points. So at most, Ferrari cost themselves 3 points had he been able to not just hang on to third, but be 5 seconds up the road from both Perez and Russell.
Okay, Antonia, then Kyle.
That's a really interesting point, actually. But I do think we're being much too reductionist about this single pit stop that allegedly cost Sainz his place. I think that we need to look at the strategy for Sainz as a whole at the rate of the race and go, okay, the safety car messed up a lot of people, but Ferrari were, from that safety car until the end of the race, floundering with strategy for Sainz, because he was working his way up the grid phenomenally and doing a brilliant, brilliant job of it. And I do just think Ferrari were kind of going, oh my goodness, what do we do? When do we pit him? We've got this penalty now to deal with. That's another thing that they had to add to their considerations. And ultimately, they did make the decision to pit him. But I do think that their decision-making as a whole throughout the Grand Prix was not very well reasoned and not executed confidently with conviction the way it should have been.
So to me, I think they had already decided to let him finish the race on those tyres. And they kind of let Sainz talk them into making a stop. And then when Sainz didn't want to because he was attacking, they were persisting with Sainz's plan to stop. And then it was far too late. And then they persisted with that plan anyway and left him floundering. And I can't agree with Matt's thing where you were saying, so he could have had third, but really it's good because they nearly got the same as fourth. It's a podium in F1, Kyle. You fight for the podium in F1.
Yeah, they've tried to package it and frame it as they took quite a risk-averse sort of approach to it. And they're like, well, we've kind of guaranteed sort of fifth. But if you think about it, that was fraught with inherent risk itself because he's having to pass cars. He could have easily tangled with somebody coming through and ended up with nothing. Whereas, yeah, exactly. So if they, I mean, know how fighty he can get. So if they would have left him out, he had a shot at maybe getting third. The worst case would have happened. He would have lost it. Well, he would have had a tyre blowout. And Bonotto, as you said, they thought it was impossible to get to the end. Gasly managed it.
Yeah.
another people, and we've constantly seen this as the track rubbers in more. They don't have data. They just basically try to simulate this. So they don't have data for this. So I'm pretty sure, and Sainz was still going strong. His pace was good. He just passed Perez. He was just started to make massive inroads onto Hamilton. So it still, to me, it defied logic. And they did, like I said, the Cardinals said they pitted in no man's land. They should have either done it 10 laps before or don't do it at all.
Yeah, I think with pit wall engineers, they are constantly making cost-benefit analysis decisions where they go based on the data they have, based on the visuals they have, and a little bit of driver feedback as well. Excuse me. But I do think where other teams succeed with this, I think a prime example actually is Lewis Hamilton. With his relationship with Bono, his pit wall engineer, is a functioning, fantastic relationship because they bear his feedback in mind while simultaneously executing what they believe to be in the best interests of his race and the team as a whole.
And they're usually in charge as well, aren't they? Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a balance between, of course, the driver's the one on the track. The driver knows what's up, but they don't know what's going on in terms of the intricacies of the tech of the car. And the driver just doesn't get to see that themselves, and the pit wall engineer does. However, when they were talking to Sainz and obviously not looking very hard at the screens in front of them that showed where on track he was and what he was doing, they didn't listen to him, and they didn't equally go, oh, actually, no, we as your team, we know what's happening. We can tell you what to do this. And I just think they just haven't got the balance that other teams have done so well to get.
Well, it's interesting. I went back and listened to the onboards, and it was really wild to hear this discussion play out as he was coming up, because they basically said, I think we're on plan A. And Carlos said, well, you just need to choose now. And they're like, okay, we're going to clear traffic and it'll be plan B. But then he got into that battle with Perez. And once he cleared Perez, he's like, should we go another lap? Which I would have loved, because then we would have seen his pace after that battle and whether or not those mediums were potentially going to hang on. But instead, they're like, no, we've made our choice, box, box, box. And he came in. But in Ferrari's defense, he was not like angry Carlos after the race either. He was like, oh, no, the team has more information and they made a choice. And to Ferrari's credit, he said, make a choice. Ferrari made a choice and they stuck with it.
I think there's a little bit of a factor in there with his reaction after the race. He himself has dropped the ball a couple of times this year and has had a couple of less than sort of flattering races. So I think he's quite aware of this. He's a clever guy, and he was playing the wise team game, not to suddenly throw it around and throw them under the bus when they dropped the ball. So I think he was quite reserved and measured and playing a team game in his press conference afterwards.
But what I do want to get back to before we move on is the place where Ferrari really does deserve a good thrashing, which is their pit stops. Because I don't understand why, and we saw it with Mercedes too, why this low-hanging fruit of Formula One is causing so much trouble for the teams.
Yeah, and it wasn't just one, it was two.
Yep.
And look, I think you guys were being a bit generous too, and I'm always sort of cautious, when you talk about naming an individual, you're saying, oh, I know better than you, and I'm not trying to do that. But if you look at the list of fails that we are talking about here, and as Paddy in our live chat put it, launching Sainz at a Williams, as well as 2 slow pit stops, all that indecision, the fact that the power units are letting them down, somebody has ultimate managerial control on why so many of those systems, so many of those organizations, so many of those teams and decisions aren't working. And if you look at Binotto's career, he was head of the engine department from 2013. He was the chief technical officer from 2016, and he's been the team principal since 2019. This Ferrari team has Binotto stamped all over it. He's not inherited too much of like bits from other people. He has been an integral part of this team. And if it's not working on so many levels, engines, pit stop, strategy, drivers, direction of setup, tactics, Binotto is ultimately the guy responsible for that, Kyle. And I know, you're going to say, oh, well, we don't want heads rolling, but it's definitely time to put the microscope on what he's doing at the head of Ferrari. Because when he was interviewed, he wasn't addressing my list and going, this is an absolute disaster. He's basically going, yeah, we didn't maximise it, but we did pretty well. No, this was rough.
Yeah, but as Antonio and I were saying earlier, like, I think they need consistency and a need to keep it. So, and Ferrari through and through has been there for forever.
Okay.
Basically, so I don't think they need to get rid of him and look at him. I think he maybe needs to have a look at their internal processes and how they're operating, how the logic ladders they are using to come to these decisions and how they're working, and maybe shuffle a couple of people around, but do not get rid of anyone. Just maybe maybe review how they're going about things and just be consistency. I think they need consistency and a nice, warm, loving hug in a family atmosphere. And at the moment, I think they're all looking over their shoulders, feeling a bit under pressure.
Logic ladders, spot the project engineer here. But look, Antonia, consistency, it's been consistently dire this season. Is that too harsh?
Not at all. And I think historically it's been pretty harsh as well. Again, casting it back to 2019, maybe even 2020 as well. Ferrari, whenever seeming to be handed a great opportunity to not even necessarily win world championships, but get good wins in the bag, something goes wrong. And going back to these logic ladders, at one end we have got Binotto, and on the other end we've got the pit wall engineer, who's giving the decision to the driver to say to pit. But there's something in between these stages, and that I just think isn't clicking. And I think it's the cohesiveness of the team as a whole, which is letting them down, because new people are coming into the team all the time. And these people are very well established in Formula One. I mean, the current strategic director has worked in Formula One since 2005 and only joined Ferrari in 2011. So through all of those years of experience, I fail to see how, these awful decisions can be put down to just one person. And I actually think what we need to look at is the little lines that we can draw between positions, between individuals within the network, and say, okay, well, where are the knots? What needs brushing through? Because something it's just not clicking.
Way too much project management speak here on this show so far. All right, let's talk about a bit of wheel-to-wheel action here, because we did see a few incidents and we saw George Russell going head-to-head with Sergio Perez. And I think I'll start this segment really by, emphasising the trend that I was pointing out with young George Russell. And we should remember he is still a relatively young driver. I think there's an expectation on George Russell that he is the next British superstar. And so the British media, British press are building him up to be the next Button, the next Hamilton. And I think there's definitely the potential to have that. I think he's had a bit of an easy ride when it's come to scrutiny, because there is so much kind of hope behind him. And he's such a great orator. He speaks incredibly well. He comes across much older than his years. But I think what we've seen in the last few races is quite a scruffy, quite a scrappy George Russell, really trying his best to establish himself and take this opportunity that he's got. I'm not knocking that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I just think that he has somehow been immune to a more critical eye. And the last few races, I think a more critical eye is possibly warranted. This isn't the smooth George Russell that everybody is hoping he'll be. And I know there's a lot of George Russell fans in our listenership and on our panel. Kyle, I think you probably count yourself among them.
Absolutely.
But, when we look at Lewis Hamilton at this stage in his career, also very scruffy, very raw, I just think that we're seeing some scruffiness and some rawness. And I'm not knocking that, because probably all the best drivers have had that at stages in their career. Certainly Verstappen had also.
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised. I think the one thing that has been surprising about George is we haven't really seen much of this yet. He's been pretty much bulletproof and he's barely put a foot wrong all season. So we're going to see a few things coming. But with this particular race and this particular incident, I think he's playing a bit of an Alonso game and a bit of devil's advocate there, because he's head of the GDPA, is he not?
Yeah.
So actually, with these new racing rules, which I don't think anyone is particularly sort of happy with. I think he's playing a bit of devil's advocate. He goes, well, technically, I got my wheel there, and it should be fine. So I think he's playing a bit of an Alonso game. Okay, I'm going to push this and see how far I can push it. And he got a bit fighty over it. So I think he was being a bit sneaky there.
Oh, possibly. But I think the more simple thing is that I think he sort of lost his head a little bit when the maneuver went wrong and he didn't get a penalty for it. And I feel like he was doubling down a little bit there, Matt.
Yeah, well, I think I could cashier Kyle's hypothesis the moment that Toto Wolff got on the blower and said, well, look, we don't really think you have a point here. Like when your own team tells you, like, you might be overstating your case a little bit. You're probably definitely overstating
it.
It was
his engineer first that was like, we didn't have the corner, George, and then Toto Wolff had to keep reminding, just get your head down, like let's keep going. And I think that this is a simple case of he just got a little bit hot under the collar. I know we see him as this cool, calm guy with PowerPoints, but he is a bit of a hothead, and we have seen it, which is not really surprising for a racing driver in his early 20s. Antonia,
I think a lot of the so-called hot-headedness can just be attributed to him wanting it so badly.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah, and exactly. It's really nice to see drivers so hungry to push on with their career and get race wins, because I guess in many ways, a lot of people I'm sure might agree that Russell did stay at Williams maybe a season too long, and that did hold him back in many ways. So I think now that he's at Mercedes, he's just so hungry to do well and so hungry to get those race wins, get those podiums, because of course he hasn't had a race win yet. No. I think everyone does actually forget that because of his position in the sport and his reputation in many ways. He's not a race winner yet, and he wants it so badly. And I think in the moment when he's had a maneuver not quite go wrong, it was a bit borderline, it's frustrating for him. And of course he's going to express that, and then there's going to be a big difference between his frustration behind the wheel and how he speaks to the media and how he talks about these incidents. Because when he's talking to the media, he's not just representing himself, he's representing the whole team.
Of course, Kyle, you and I, we keep it very cool, calm and collected if we're karting on our kart communications. Never a misplaced word. But we have to remember as well, Russell was very scruffy off the start again. He was scruffy in Silverstone. Here he was, getting very squirrely, and I nearly came together with Norris. If you look back at that start, it was actually quite emotional going, back from the podium places. But we spent, Kyle, a lot of time analysing these new rules from the outside, and if the outside car is something by the apex something, then they're entitled to something, and you go, that's great. But this was about a car basically having a big old lunge down the inside, and I'm really no clearer as to then did he have to leave Perez room on the outside, and how on earth are you meant to judge in that split second where you were at the apex and who's meant to leave who room? Surely Russell, the amount of room Russell can leave Perez in that situation is decided long before they know who was slightly where at the apex.
Yeah, and I will probably be shot down for this, but I do think these rules have come about as a result of maybe damage is the wrong word, but of the events that happened last year and then the subsequent gaslighting of the officials and all the fans, because no one really knows what's right or wrong anymore, because there was a lot of sort of on the fringe sort of cases happened last year, and a lot of lobbying and I'm going to come straight out and say it, gaslighting of the fans and the officials saying this is okay, it's all about letting them race. And now we have this very sort of prescriptive set of rules in place, and this is why I think George was intentionally doing an Alonso tactic of picking holes in it and trying to play devil's advocate with it, because he doubled down on it in his interview after the race, and he brought it up. He wasn't prompted. He was really like, no, in theory, I'm the inside car. I got my front wheel level with his back wheel. That technically means it's my corner, and he was really, really going for it. So I do think he was trying to exploit and maybe expose these new racing rules.
Are we just trying to establish whose fault is it? Whose fault is it? Okay, so there was no actual contact here, but, I think, Perez jumped out of the way. That's why there wasn't contact. Antonia, do you have an opinion on whose fault it would have been had this resulted in a crash? Who was right here?
Well, in my opinion, George, like you said, he was making a bit of a cheeky maneuver, I guess, kind of feeling out if it would work out. I mean, Alonso is, in recent years, especially a very clean driver, and he doesn't throw too many strops on the track. You know, if he's in a compromised position, he does back out, which is, you know, that's
like
a testament
a
to
car
him.
strop rather than a vocal strop. Yeah.
A bit of both, maybe. You know, you don't hear him whining on the radio much, but I do think that George, you know, he was a bit borderline there. I do think had there have been an incident, it would have been his fault. And there actually was a very similar incident in the W Series race where the rear car tried to charge down, literally crashed into the car in front.
Yeah.
Rather inexplicably, because they were going for a space that frankly wasn't there. I think George was doing that.
That was from so far back. And I think that's the issue with these rules. With George saying, the W Series one was so far back. But with Russell here, he was coming from far back. And this is always the difficult one to judge, isn't it, Carl? Because, I mean, you can just not brake. And then, technically, you've got your front wheel alongside the back wheel. Anyone can not stop at the corner.
Exactly. And I think everything and everyone has said here is exactly right. And I think the stewards were correct. And I do think George Russell was wrong. And I do think these rules are kind of leaving this open to interpretation. We saw pretty much this exact scenario, lap 1, Abu Dhabi last year. And there was some outrage from certain fan bases and other people arguing. And this was the exact same scenario. And you need to try to mitigate against people just having a crazy dive bomb and forcing the other driver off. And I agree. Yeah, George was in the wrong. He forced the other driver off. Perez was right to cut the chicane and then give away the advantage, exactly like Hamilton did at lap 1 Abu Dhabi last year. It's a slam dunk. So that's why I was surprised that George was sort of fighting it so much, is why I think it's intentionally he's chosen that angle of attack. So if a collision would have happened, I'd say that's pretty much 100% on George.
And the thing is, and this goes back to me saying that, you know, that there's a scruffiness, which he is. I know I said Perez was more to blame. Oh, it's Russell and Perez again coming together, isn't it? I think Russell's finding himself in these situations, and that's just taking the edge off his weekends. But I've got a solution to this, which is get rid of chicanes. This problem only really, just get rid of all chicanes. You're looking at me like I'm mad, Antonia. Just have real
chicanes. They're vital in Formula One for modulating speed, and I think it's a really interesting element of any track. I mean, the bus stop chicane at Spa is legendary. No. I'd be devastated if that were cut out.
Monza, which is like the worst of the European tracks, is completely ruined by basically being all chicanes. Get rid of the chicanes at Montreal, and we could just have basically a fun oval with a hairpin in the middle. No. You're not taking that argument seriously. Right, you shouldn't either.
No, you're wrong.
Good, I can accept that. I've been wrong before. All right, Matt, where should we roll on to? Because there was, in the end, advantage Russell from the virtual safety car. And I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, we should probably explain that a bit. To my understanding, what happened was a virtual safety car, because Ferrari, I mean, if we're going to talk about Ferrari fails, how about pushing the pop button on Joe's engine just a couple of laps too late for Sainz to benefit from it? I mean, surely they could have made that explode sooner and solved all their problems.
But what did actually happen?
What did actually happen was because it was parked very near an exit, they didn't call a full safety car. They called a virtual safety car. And as we all know, that once the virtual safety car ending message is displayed on our dashboard, between 10 and 15 seconds, the track will go green. Unless either the wrong button is pushed or the correct button is pushed, but it yields the incorrect result, which in this case was a second virtual safety car is ending call. And this is where Perez got a bit hot under the collar, because he saw the first one, he timed it, he made time, he was on his delta, he was like, I'm going to be ahead of Russell and I'm going to take this podium for my team. And then he got a second safety car is ending and he got a bit bamboozled. But what happens at that point is there's an automatic backup procedure which came into play. And there was actually sort of a third safety car is ending, which was the actual safety car is ending.
All right.
And Russell happened to time it exceedingly well in terms of managing his delta time, whereas Perez, because he was expecting thing to end, had run out of delta time and was actually slowing when the track went green.
Yeah, no, I think what happened there, and I think it's a little bit harsh on Perez to say that he was caught sleeping, as a few people have said. I do think George capitalised on a fantastic opportunity, just happened to time it well, and frankly made Perez look like he was doing an outlap and letting the faster car through. But that being said, Perez is very experienced at this stage in his career. He should surely know not to be leaving even the smallest of windows for that to happen. And frankly, George breezed past, and then Perez allowed a much better battle, to be honest, to resume. And he kind of woke up a little bit, and we had a really great battle.
I think there's quite a good point there. Like when Perez actually sort of woke up, so to speak, I actually think his struggles before the VSC came out, everyone was saying his tires were done, but I think that was a thermal issue. I think he was overheating his tires. So the VSC had come out, it cooled his tires down, and all of a sudden he had loads of pace again. But with the VSC trip up, you could see when he got going, he got a big load of wheel spin. So he was actually decelerating when it went green and not accelerating. And George Russell was hanging back and just hovering on the throttle. So the inertia is working in his favor, whereas the inertia is working against Perez, because he was just about to go and it was like, oh, sugar, and then had to get on the brakes. And as soon as he got on the brakes, then it went green, and that just completely, So Russell was straight past. I do think Perez was a little bit naughty, a bit late, his move in defense, and luckily Russell read it quite well, and also against Sainz as well. I thought Perez was a little bit extreme with his late moves in defence, but it was interesting. As soon as his tyres came in, we then got treated to a really good battle. Otherwise, I think George Russell wouldn't have got anywhere near him if he'd have stayed ahead. So that's why he was so angry, because he knew that his tyres were back in the window.
But in general, as a Perez fan, I've been really disappointed the last few races in general. We've had slightly better performances in qualifying. He sort of rescued it a little bit on the Saturday, but when it's come to races, he has kind of disappeared since Barcelona, Monaco, and it just looks like now everyone was talking about how he had a big deficit to make up in qualifying, and that was putting him on the back foot in races, and it's just gone the other way. And from being a legendary tyre management guy, Matt, he's now someone who doesn't seem to be able to hold a stint together, and he did look just lackluster all through the race, and even in the battles, like you said, he did. It might be unfair that he was napping for the VSC one, but just in general, he just didn't seem on it. And when he was being interviewed, you get the feeling that he doesn't know why. And obviously there could be differences between the car, but it's been disappointing to see a bit of a mid-season fizzle.
Yeah, I get that, and my personal take on that is that the problem for Perez is the way Verstappen likes the car to be for him to drive. He likes it incredibly strong on the nose. So he likes a very pointy car. And that just doesn't really suit Perez's natural driving style. So he's having to adapt more and more. And the more he adapts, the less the things he's good at work during the race.
Yeah, that's a really important point to bring up, actually. We do need to remember there is a very big stylistic difference between Verstappen and Checo. And Verstappen being the, number one driver per se, the car will be configured more towards his driving style and his driving preferences. And Verstappen is characteristically very hard on the car. He'll brake late into corners, pick up the throttle very early coming out of them, which is very hard on the tyres, and is, to be honest, almost the opposite of what Checo does, which makes for a really big gulf between finding a compromise in the car's setup. And, there'll be a few differences between the cars, but I do think leaning towards the end of the season, which we are now, and the championship end is getting ever closer, Verstappen is looking like he is very likely to take it. I do think Red Bull might be making decisions considerably more now to benefit Verstappen, and that comes at Checo's it lets him down a bit.
I don't think that's controversial, to be fair. Yeah. Kyle.
I don't disagree with that, but there is another way to look at this, and it takes into sort of talent levels, but also Red Bull. It's beneficial for Red Bull to have two drivers in the fight, particularly for strategy and the team things. And I've seen this pounded about quite a lot, of saying they're developing the car to suit Verstappen more. And yes, Verstappen likes it on the nose, but we have seen, particularly during Friday practice, the car was not very on the nose. It's quite understeery, and he was struggling with it. So they're having to use all the tools in the toolbox to make it more pointy. Now, you could argue that Red Bull are putting the performance and taking the car in the direction which they think is fastest, and it's up to both of their drivers to adapt. And Verstappen has just adapted better to it. Now, if you look at both the drivers, Verstappen is born and bred to be a champion. He is the son of two racing drivers. He has been born and bred to be this, and arguably is one of the most prodigious talents we've ever seen in the sport. Did we really think that Perez, in a straight fight going up against him, is going to beat him? Perez is amazing and very, very good, but realistically, I mean, do we think that they could do that? So I think it might be a case of, yes, you may well be correct that the car's going more in Verstappen's favour, but I think quite a lot of it is Verstappen's just adapting better to the upgrades than Perez is.
Yeah, I will note just very quickly that Checo did know what he was getting into when he joined the Red Bull team. Red Bull have been desperately for the last few seasons trying to find a driver that complements Verstappen in pursuing a title. And, you know, whether that was Gasly or Albon, they didn't find those qualities and they found them in Checo. Yeah. And his driving complements and supports, most importantly, Verstappen the best. And when Checo came and he signed his contract, he would have known full well that he was going to be positioned as the second driver. And if it were going to come down to even just a decision between who to favour, it will always be Verstappen.
Some good news if you happen to be a fan of Lewis Hamilton. And you know me, I'm neutral, but he does seem to be stretching his legs a little bit in the 2022 season. And it could be, I know there's a bit of disagreement as to how much experimenting he was having to do to get the porpoising under control. And you can argue about whether he had bad luck with a series of safety cars or not. But certainly in the last few races, it's looking like very much situation normal at Mercedes. You've got Lewis Hamilton there as their favoured driver, probably their favoured number one driver, probably the driver that, you know, development and strategy will go towards the most. And he's taking advantage of that. And you are seeing, it seems, a Lewis Hamilton that is consistent, is aggressive, is fast. And it has been a very frustrating season for Lewis Hamilton fans. But everything's starting to click together. And whilst I don't want to damn Mercedes with faint praise, because I'm aware that the safety car has sort of flattered their pace a little bit for the second time, and they're flattered by the fact that Verstappen had no real competition, so he probably wasn't pushing the absolute nuts off of it for that post-safety car part of the race. Something has changed. Something has clicked. It's probably a weekend where the car wasn't exactly where they wanted it to be, yet the machine is working. They maximised it. It was a double podium. Am I being too hopeful?
I don't think you're being hopeful enough. I think Mercedes is in a very interesting place right now. They are considerably faster than anyone but Red Bull and Ferrari. Their biggest deficit is in qualifying, but oftentimes in races, they are much, much, much closer. And in fact, I believe either Toto or Hamilton made a fascinating comment. He said, it's really just about the first 10 laps for us. So we lose time in the first 10 laps. Yeah. And I remember making the comment in a chat, like lap 8, I'm like, oh, Lewis is exactly as fast as Leclerc and Verstappen. And again, lap 10, Mercedes, I think, is in some ways a lot closer. If they can figure out why they are slow in the initial phase of the race and the initial phase after their pit stop, then I don't think a race win is out of the picture for them before the end of the season.
I do think that's an interesting point. However, Mercedes are flattered by the misfortune of their rivals, and Mercedes are in a bit of a lonely position at the moment, where Red Bull and Ferrari are pulling away with it, and everyone else does seem a little bit of a leap behind them. But that does mean that when there is a slip up on either of Red Bull or Ferrari's parts, then of course Mercedes get to capitalize on that and get on the podiums. And I think today was a really good example of that, to be honest, with Sainz being a bit behind in the pack, and then obviously Charles' incident, that's two people out of the way towards their podium. However, as the season goes on, the drivers are going to get more comfortable with the car, and I think this, excuse me,
is that for you?
I think that this is one of the, I do think this is one of the main instances in which, you know, a team will start a new season with these new regulations, which are so very different to what especially Lewis is used to. And when we're comparing him to George, who has been fighting with a subpar car the last few years, George has been having to really push the last few years, whereas whilst Lewis he's been a bit comfortable.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with Mercedes sort of getting to their ultimate pace is they seem to be a bit softer on the tyres as well. So maybe that's why they're struggling in the first few laps. They can't quite get the tyres into the window. And we saw, as in Silverstone, Lewis seemed to have the best tyre life out of anybody, and they keep going. And as Antonia said, George is coming from a shed, getting into quite much of a faster car. But even he is having really, really good tyre wear and tyre life. So I think Mercedes, in maybe the oddly, complete inverse to what it was last year, in the hotter races and higher tyre deg races, are actually going to be stronger and closer to the front. So I think we can be optimistic for Hungary. I actually think it's a high downforce track. And I think if it's going to be a tyre muncher, that's when we're going to see Mercedes come right to the front.
Okay, a little bit of a quick fire through the rest of the midfield. Matt, Ocon harpooned Tsunoda. Boo, Ocon.
Oh, you're just setting me up because, it was actually, even though the stewards disagreed, and I hate to say it, but I watched it on TV. I'm like, yeah, to me, I was surprised. They didn't just say it was a first lap incident, because that's what it looked like to me. And they frequently do make that call. But then I got really surprised when I saw Russell put Perez completely off, and there was not even an investigation for what seemed to be a much more egregious plunge up the inside. So I decided to do that thing I do, go back and watch the onboards. And here's where I'm going to start. Factually, Ocon was either exactly alongside of or ahead of Tsunoda going into turn 8. Tsunoda, when he turns in, takes a very, very squeeze line on Ocon, so much so that Ocon actually turns deeper into the corner. And before he even gets to the painted part of the curb, has already lost the rear of the car because he's been forced into a steeper line. And additionally, that steeper line takes him, instead of over the painted curb and turn 8, the inner bit is higher than the outer bit. And it also takes him over that higher bit, which is what really unsettled the car and sent him into Tsunoda. So his car was out of control. Yeah. But for me, that happened on entry, and with the very steep line Tsunoda took into that corner when he should have been giving Ocon room.
So he was out of control, down on the inside, punches a hole in Tsunoda. But I think you're right. I think 5 seconds might have been too harsh, Matt. He harpooned him. He harpooned him.
No, he didn't. Tsunoda came from behind on the outside and squeezed him onto the curb. And that's why the car got unsettled. And if Tsunoda had left him more room, then the two of them would have been racing on the other side of that corner. And I was surprised that the stewards did not pick that up.
I partly agree with Matt that yes, Tsunoda may have squeezed him a little bit, but I think the penalty was slam dunk, and I think it was exactly correct. It wasn't like Ocon was defending from Tsunoda going around the outside. Ocon was having a lunge trying to overtake him going up the inside. So and Ocon hit the curb, was out of control, and just clipped him. So I think that is on Ocon completely.
All right, I'm just going to say, when I looked at the onboards and I looked at both of them, it looked like to me that Ocon was even with or ahead of Tsunoda going into that corner. And that's why I was confused about the way the stewards decided to adjudicate that. And you can look back, and if you disagree with me, fair enough, we can talk about it. But
okay, let's move on. McLaren, Antonia, a bit of a meh weekend overall for McLaren. They are solidly in that position, but I don't know. A bit better from Ricciardo, a little bit lackluster from Norris at the start. I found myself disappointed.
Yeah, so rather underwhelming weekend for the McLaren boys. I just don't think it was quite there this weekend. There was there just wasn't a lot really happening with them, to be honest. I think the quali performances were a bit subpar. I do think Danny Rick could have given more. However, he has been struggling with the car all year, so expectations are admittedly rather low.
Yeah.
But to pull the finish that they did, I think they're bearing in mind 5 cars retired from the race. So the worst they could have done was 15th.
Okay, and where did they end up? 7th and 8th? Something in the regional?
7th and 9th.
7th and 9th, yeah. Yeah, so not too much more to say, on McLaren, really. A bit of a nothingy weekend. In the end, Kyle, turned out to be a nothingy weekend for Haas as well, which was a shame because it was looking okay. Magnussen overtook 70 cars on lap 1.
It was actually looking very, very promising. They were both coming through the field. And what the commentary didn't quite pick up on the first couple of laps, that Mick Schumacher and Magnussen were having an absolute ding-dong battle. They were side by side for most of the first sort of opening lap. They got absolutely done over by the safety car. They both pitted really aggressively. We just heard from Gunter on the pit wall saying, yep, we're going really aggressive. We're going to get in free air. And they were already lapping a second to a second and a half quicker than everyone in front of them. So they were already just about to jump most of the midfield. And I think we were deprived of seeing them absolutely thrusting themselves right into the top 10. So Haas, I think, were really, really unlucky today.
And also Haas have just made themselves the worst car to be stuck behind, isn't it? It's something about their setup, I'm assuming, Matt, where they've just gone for high speed, low drag.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, they have that Ferrari power unit. Second of all, Magnussen is just a wrecking ball when it comes to defending. And the car is genuinely fast, despite not really having had a lot of attention yet. So, I can't wait to see what happens when they finally bring an upgrade to this thing, because who knows, maybe they'll be the ones winning races.
Yeah, well, maybe. And a slightly less than bad as it could have been performance from Aston Martin as well. They've been nowhere, but as Antonia kind of pointed out, 5 cars retired from this race, but a point at least.
Yeah, they did all right. I mean, there was a really nice battle unfolding at the end between Seb and Lance. And I think it's such a shame we didn't have just a couple more laps maybe to see how it could have come out, because we don't often see Aston Martin in the middle of the action. And it was really nice to actually see them having a bit of a tussle. But yeah, again, 5 cars retired. And I do think had those cars not retired, they could have been a bit further back in the race. So again, profiting from others' misfortune, but still a good race.
And and on that, I just want to put some things straight. We've seen there's been a bit of outrage on Twitter, people thinking Stroll brake checked Vettel coming out of the last corner. It was good to see them both fighting. That was not a brake check. That is one of the oldest tricks in the book, and it's called parking it on the apex. He just failed to accelerate, very different from a brake check, and completely just tripped Vettel up, it's rude to do that to your teammate. Very, very rude. We know there's probably not a lot of love lost between them two, but actually, that it was all fair. It was all fair game, but there's been a lot of people saying that he should have got a penalty and it was filthy. It's not. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book.
So not a penalty for me, but I don't think it was quite straightforward as the parking it on the apex. If they'd been taking the same line, but he kind of lingered, like you see a lot of cars doing around, say, Luffield at Silverstone. But he seemed to, basically, he took an earlier apex. Vettel looked to go a bit wider, but once Stroll had already gone past his apex point, he very clearly then cranked the steering on to take another stab into the inside to then block. And I think it was a bit more of an aggressive block than simply just lingering and not getting on the throttle.
It was rude. It was extremely, extremely rude, but I don't think it was outside the rules of racing. And to be honest, if I was Vettel going into that corner, I would be half expecting some sort of tactic like that, as I have been victim of in the sim many a times. You need to see that coming, and Vettel did, luckily. Hence, he didn't just drive straight into the back of it.
No, absolutely. Seb is an immensely experienced driver, and he'll know full well what to expect going around a corner, especially when he's in the middle of a battle. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all, to be honest. It was just a defensive move. I think that's all you can call it, really. He covered off where he could have been overtaken from.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah, I suppose ultimately Vettel wasn't alongside, so Stroll can take any line he wants, as long as that doesn't become weaving. So had he gone to the inside, made his block, and then gone back to the outside because Vettel had seen that coming, then we start to get into the territory of weaving. Now, yeah, I think that takes us to, no, Carl.
So just whilst we mentioned weaving, there's one driver we haven't mentioned who was in stealth mode and got up and got a top 6 again, and that was Mr. Alonso.
He's good, isn't he? He's magic. Yeah. You're not an Alonso fan, though, are you, Carl?
Not particularly. I think he's a fantastic driver. I think his some of his outside the car tactics are somewhat questionable sometimes, shall we say? But but there was a really good story drop just over the weekend about the drivers' briefing about him still protesting his innocence about the Bottas weave in Canada, and the whole room erupting and laughing when they were shown several angles of him being completely guilty.
Fair enough. Sorry.
Yeah, no, with Alonso, he's, again, a very experienced driver. And I think it's really nice that he's come back to the sport, because he's come back with a really good attitude. And again, a lot of his comments quite recently have been a little bit controversial, yes, but no, great race for him today. And it's been a great couple of races, really. He's put in a couple of really, really good results that really prove anyone wrong who was doubting his decision to return to the sport. I think he's a great face to have in the sport, and he's doing thoroughly well.
I couldn't agree more. He's barely 20 points behind Ocon.
Oh, here we go. You had to take it there. Okay, let's move on to the podium. Champagne! Okay, admittedly, not the most thrilling race in the history of Formula One. In the context of Paul Ricard, a track that I always feel should be more entertaining than it ends up being. Maybe it's not fully earning its place in our hearts, and by all reports isn't on the schedule for 2023, as rumour suggests that perhaps Spa and Paul Ricard will be casualties of that 2023 calendar. I'm more upset about Spa than I am about Paul Ricard, if that's one way to put it. And we're heading towards a Hungaroring, which is a race that I really like. Again, I am looking forward to this regulation set hitting a track that F1 has overgrown, but does provide opportunities for racing, especially into turn 1 and into turn 2. To me, it feels like Red Bull have more than one hand on both titles at the moment. We go into the summer break. I think the Hungaroring has to be a disaster zone for Red Bull, and Ferrari have to come in triumphant with a 1-2 for us to go into the summer break thinking anything other than this is a rundown towards a Red Bull victory. And I know people might get excited about the resurgence of Lewis Hamilton. I certainly have. I've certainly enjoyed that result today. And I think the sport or the season will be interesting and more exciting with Hamilton and Russell fighting for wins. But I do think that is all they're fighting for. And I think Hamilton seems to be driving just a little bit less stressfully. It looks like he's got less pressure on him. He needs to get a few wins and finish above his young teammate, and that will probably count as a success for this season. But I think what it does probably guarantee is that he'll be around for 2023 to try and expel the ghost of Abu Dhabi 2021 and get that title number 8. Here on Missed Apex podcast, we like to give out some awards on the race reviews. One is light and fluffy and positive, and the other is just pure armchair F1 strategist and critiquing of people at the very top of their game. So get your answers ready, panel, and I wonder if anyone's going to say Ferrari for the Missed Apex award. But let's do the good thing first. Kyle Power, Cambridge resident. No. I'm bigging you up first. Okay, man of engineering analysis, reluctant internet user. I think you're only on social media because we've bullied you to be. But I think you're into the Twitter now. I think you like posting your hot takes, and people should go and follow you at Kyle Power F1. Don't shrug. You love it. I know you're the sort of person who likes to, tell everyone that I don't even own jeans. I know you're that kind of guy. Like, I didn't even own a pair of jeans. Metaphorically, I know you literally have jeans. But go and follow Kyle at Kyle Power F1. You've not got a TikTok account yet? Not yet?
I do, but I lasted 5 minutes
And then-
before my anger level started going through the roof. I'll try it again another day.
Oh, okay. So, who is your thing of the weekend, or what is your thing of the weekend?
My thing of the weekend initially started off negative and then it went positive.
Oh, yeah.
It was the TV direction. So you may have seen by my rage caps lock expletive filled rage message I sent to the group chat. I've been getting really, really peeved with the TV direction and their habit of on lap 2 and start of lap 3, just as the DRS starts to be enabled and battles happening, going for prolonged 5-minute long replays of the start. And they started to do the same thing here. And I was already saying to myself, right, here we go. Q 3, 2, 1 replays of the start. And it happened. So I was like, no, started to shout and scream, wrote an expletive sort of rage cap lock sort of message. I was like, don't you dare. And I think they must have heard it. They, like, my power of telepathy must have actually came through and actually heard it. So they showed a couple of little replays, then instantly switched back to the action. And then we got no more replays or missed action. So thank you, Mr. TV Director. Thank you very much for listening to me.
You say no missed action. Yes, you're very important, Kyle. Everyone's tuned into your brainwaves. But actually, we didn't see any of the Magnussen overtakes from lap 1. We didn't see any of the Sainz overtakes. Not on the feed I was watching anyway.
No, we didn't, but it was because we were transfixed on the absolutely enthralling and gripping battle at the front. And I believe it was Alex Van Gien sort of said this, because most people say this is boring, but it's not. I thought it was fantastic. We had a brilliant battle. Yes, they weren't overtaking, but it was very tense. So we were rightfully concentrating on that. So I thought the TV direction was a huge step in the right direction this weekend.
And it was fascinating just seeing those cars being able to really follow, and the DRS not being, being part of the tools. But, normally we're used to the cars, once they get within, 2 seconds, they've got like one opportunity to get into the DRS zone, get that overtake done, and then they were having to chill out, go back and cool their tyres down. Whereas now, seeing them, yes, being able to follow, being able to lap after lap, be in that DRS zone, yes, there was a little bit of a payoff because it looked like Verstappen's tyres were then wearing faster than Leclerc's. But yeah, that does bode well for future seasons as well. They seem to have got a handle on that issue that was really plaguing Formula One, that cars couldn't even get close. All right, good thing award then to TikTok star, and I think I genuinely mean that now, Antonia Rankin. Is it Antonia F1 on TikTok?
F1 Antonia.
F1 Antonia on TikTok. Links to everyone's social media in the show notes below. But you've got something like 45,000 followers on there now. It's absolutely massive.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate that people trust my waffle enough to follow and listen along.
Yeah, but also you've not succumbed to TikTok fade. You've been very consistent. The quality has been high. And, you can see from the comments, you've built up a very kind of loyal and engaged audience.
Oh, it's so lovely. There are so many people who are just so kind, and it's a really little community. I like to call it my little corner of the internet, because we're all just there because we love F1 and want to gossip and chat about it.
I can absolutely relate to that feeling. So even if you're not a TikToker, go and check out what Antonio is doing on there. I won't pretend that I understand all of it. Like, I don't really get why the miming of the stuff, but I'm guessing I'm not the target audience necessarily. So,
well, there's a little bit of everything. I've got some miming, got some information, some tech, a little bit of mucking about. It's a nice balance.
It's good fun. All right, who or what or how is your thing of the weekend? No, how doesn't work. What is your thing of the weekend?
I'm going to revisit Mercedes' performance, but not for the reasons we've talked about. I think I'm really impressed with how steadfast they are and unwavering in their quality of racing. So whilst a lot of teams today failed to make use of the misfortune of their direct opponents, Mercedes were on it and put in a fantastic race. They made strategy calls that were appropriate at the right time. Neither drivers made any unforced errors. And I do think that it was a very great race from them to get the absolute best possible result from the situation they were in. And I think that deserves a lot of credit.
Well, excellent. Matt Trumpets, you are Matt PT55 on Twitter. And when I say follow Matt on Instagram and Facebook, but it is just pictures of trumpets, I'm not joking. You do just seem to post pictures of your trumpet in I'm here at the park, and then there's a picture of your trumpet. Do you do that because I say that you're doing that? Are you Have I invoked that, or is it you just have a habit of taking pictures of your trumpet? Not a euphemism, real trumpet.
Yeah, real trumpet. I was doing it before you got annoyed by it, but I will say you being annoyed by it certainly keeps me going.
Okay, good.
In the dark times.
A little of column A, little of column B.
Yeah, and that and my daughter's baking. If you like baking, then you'll see some of her. Well, not for much longer. She's off to college, but that's another story. You want to know what I like.
What is your thing of the weekend?
And I cannot believe no one chose this.
It better not be Ocon.
And it's left me. I'm going to seize two.
Okay, go on.
I'm torn. They're both about Carlos Sainz.
Okay.
One was Carlos Sainz correcting his engineer about the kind of penalty that he had.
Oh, add that to my list, that they didn't know what kind of penalty he had. Jeez. Okay.
That was hilarious. But my thing of the entire weekend had to be his 5-corner overtake on Perez, because, oh my goodness, how could we have not mentioned that up until now? That was an extraordinary thing. I went back and watched it on the onboards. Just amazing racing. Say what you will. I know he's not as fast as a Leclerc in qualifying, maybe not in race pace, but man, does he have it all put together right now?
If those cars can now follow each other, and if we're getting into a bit more of a tyre-wary window that Pirelli are putting us in, those kind of battles towards the end of the race with low grip, like they were fighting through the final corner, which that wasn't really happening at the beginning of the race, but we saw a few scraps evolve to be there. So I like this kind of moving, shifting battle zones over the course of a race.
Yeah. And it just, the back and forth of it as Perez was defending, and he just gradually worked him farther and farther offline until finally he had the run down the front straight with DRS and got round him. It just, oh man. Sorry. Goosebumps for me. I love that.
I'm going to give my thing of the weekend to Verstappen and Red Bull. You know that scene in Indiana Jones where one of the enemy guys comes down, slashes swords, does all these fancy moves, makes a big fuss, and then Indiana Jones just pulls out a revolver and finishes the battle, and it is almost surprised at how easy it is. I mean, that is Red Bull. They have got all the tools in their locker. They're doing all the right things. They're running through their drills, and they almost seem disappointed that the plans and strategies that they've got all lined up, and the talent and the race plan they've got lined up, they don't need them. They don't need to use them. They just need to wait for Ferrari to fall down or turn up to a gunfight with a samurai sword. And they need to keep their concentration levels up, concentrate on what they're doing, and they are doing it. They are the best. That is the best driver team package out there this weekend and pretty much every weekend, since the early DNF. So that's my thing of the weekend. Goes to Verstappen and Red Bull. Now we get to be all negative. Yay!
Oh no, you missed the apex.
All right, Kyle. I know you haven't got a negative bone in your body. You're too nice. Nice to a flaw. But who can you criticise this week?
I'm not going to take the obvious. I will leave that open goal for somebody else. But mine's McLaren.
Okay.
They apparently had a really big upgrade, and they're McLaren, and they got 7th and 9th. The drivers seemed relatively happy with it. It was nice to see Ricciardo closer to Norris, but McLaren, come on, we want to see you. It's been years and years now. We want to see you getting up towards the front. Now, under Zach Brown, they're quite a bit more of a personable sort of human team than they were under the big bad Ron, as it was before. But come on, guys, it's McLaren. We expect more than you, and they're just still fighting around in the midfield. And this big upgrade package, I wanted a lot more from them, and it was disappointing. It was flaccid. That's what they were. They were flaccid.
All right, I'm going to move on from that pretty quickly. Antonia, who missed the apex for you?
I would have also said McLaren. However, I'll move on to a similar point. I think with Alfa Romeo, I do feel like they just missed a shot this weekend.
Where were they?
I think, they were nowhere. They were in the middle of the pack being completely eaten up, which is so disappointing because, frankly, Valtteri Bottas has put in some really impressive performances recently. And where was that today when a good performance could have put him, 7th, 6th, even higher? I just think it was a really missed opportunity. And that's why I was so impressed with Mercedes, because they took the opportunity. Whereas I do think Alfa Romeo fumbled the bag a bit.
And Joe, who's been showing, I've cursed him by saying I've really enjoyed his performances and enjoyed him doing well. Again, underwhelming. And then that little kind of snap moment, I can't remember who he ran into in the end. Was it Schumacher? I think he might have had a little run-in with Schumacher.
Yeah, it was, it was Schumacher.
No, okay. Well, yeah, okay. So Alfa Romeo, yeah. To be fair, they didn't really register on. I don't think I wrote any notes about Alfa Romeo. Matt, who missed the apex for you?
I know it was exciting for them to get a whole single point.
Why? No. The thing
I know, and they're our friends too, and I like them. I like so much about what they do, but I just, they're not sticking with anything long enough to understand it. And it's costing them loads in the championship. And I felt that way for a while. And that's going to be my criticism. I think they're a good team. I think they have a lot going on. But when your two drivers after a B spec are battling out for a single point and just, oh, look, we had a great day because we passed Albon and a Williams, then I don't know. Like the expectation bar for me for Aston was higher.
Fair enough.
And I feel I just feel like I want them to get there because I want to see that happen.
They have the resources for us not to be impressed with a single point at Paul Ricard.
Yes.
Absolutely, for sure. I've just thought of another good thing that I'm going to sneak in there, which is that the crowd seemed to be having a lovely time and everybody seemed to be having a safe, happy time. And well done, Paul Ricard, for having a crowd that was pretty good. But I am going to give my Missed Apex Award, can you believe it, for the worst ever team performance of a title contending team. It's got to go to Ferrari. 2 bodged pit stops, a car at the back with an engine penalty, pushing a driver to breaking point, launching one of your cars at a Williams, indecision on strategy, telling your driver to pit while he's in an overtaking maneuver, not knowing what penalty your driver has got, giving up a podium to pit yourself into 5th place and get the fastest lap, doing all of this to finish 5th and have a DNF with the 2 fastest cars of the race weekend. It unfortunately does have to go to Ferrari. But on we go to the Hungary. Please do follow my panel. The links are in the show notes below at Kyle Power F1. Click the link on the TikTok to follow Antonia Rankin and go and follow Matt Trumpets on Instagram to look at his trumpet, or on Twitter at MattPT55 to get his hot takes. The show is at Missed Apex F1. You can follow me at Spanners Ready. There are a few karting tickets left for the 3rd of September. You are now going to have to get in pretty quick if you want to get a seat. And email racecontrol@missedapex.net if you want to get involved in the next season of the Missed Apex iRacing Cup. We're always available. Feedback at missedapex.net. I think everyone's been enjoying those mailbag episodes, but wherever we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. So if anyone needs to go on the panel, do feel free to go. But we have one more award, don't we, Matt? Which is
Comment of the Week.
And this is where we acknowledge the great contribution of our patron Slack group, who have actually been keeping us quite amused and keeping us giggling with the live chat all throughout the show. Some contenders and a winner, if you will, Matt.
All right. We have first in Stuart Van Wall. Event. Kyle mentioned tires before Matt.
Okay. I mean, you have to specifically know what event is referring to, so that's quite niche, but let's go.
Yes, well, it was an event, regardless of whether you know what it was or not. 2, we have Mike Stoner in with Leclerc was on plan C, but also plan R, A, S, and H.
I can't do spelling. Tell me why that's funny.
Rash.
Oh, I still don't know why.
It was rash. It was rash. It's losing the end there.
No, that's too clever. I'm confused and angered by that one. That can't win.
We have one that you pointed out earlier, our friend Maria Klados with Plan B for Bennett.
Sometimes the simplest ones are best. I did Plan E for Explode for Sainz in the last race, and it got like 8,000 likes on Twitter. I had to mute it in the end.
Yeah, this also works. We have our friend Tomato Mateo going, this Halloween, I'm sneaking up behind Carlos Sainz and saying, box, box, box.
Don't do that. Oh, my goodness. Yes.
And last, we have Wes in with Benato has got MS Project and Slack open during races.
Again, that's too clever. If you explain to me why that's funny, I might be impressed.
I think it was the strategy indecision.
Oh, okay. I like the one that made me laugh, but I've already forgotten.
Fine. Maria Klados, you have one comment of the week for Plan B for Bennett.
Comment of the week.
Oh, we're out of here. See ya. Goodbye, guys. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back here soon, broadcasting from our shed. Let the shuffling commence.